I'm Edward October, and this is A Nefarious Nightmare. This podcast contains foul language and discussions of violence. Additional trigger warnings will be posted as needed in the show notes. Listener discretion is advised.
Violence against those who are in the LGBTQ plus community or those who identify as such still occurs to this day. We feel that this community is especially vulnerable because, once again, here it is late 2022, and we still see hatred and violence against the community.
Today, we will be discussing two cases that are similar in setting and need a ton of awareness. Very little is out there on both victims, so let's change that. It's important to remember that they both happened in Philadelphia, and the victims just so happened to be gay. These crimes were not deemed as hate crimes, but we will leave that up to you all to decide. With that, I'm Amanda Cronin.
And I'm Courtney Fenner, and A Nefarious Nightmare presents It's Not Always Sunny, the murders of Naasire Johnson and Eric Pope.
Violence among couples does indeed exist. It does not matter your sexual orientation. It's a known fact that sometimes a power dynamic is at play and manipulation then occurs. We talk about this quite a bit when we discuss narcissism, but it's more than just an armchair diagnosis. In fact, not all couples are the victim of violence from their spouse or significant other, but there is an alarming rate in which abuse does occur.
This is typically seen and familiar in, say, a man versus woman dynamic, where the man is naturally seen as stronger than the woman and thus overtakes the woman. Now, not to excuse this by any stretch of the imagination, but if it works out, this can be seen as a positive. What we mean is that if one person in a relationship is dominant and the other is submissive, or one is the alpha and the other is not, that can work out just fine where respect is given and received. Relationships can and actually do work out with that dynamic, but there are more factors than just a dom-sub dynamic. Relationships involve being a team, seeing each other as equals, love, communication, empathy, forgiveness, fairness, respect, and even friendship. This can happen with any couple, no matter what the sexual orientation.
The point we are trying to make with this, though, as it does seem to play a role in our first story today, is that there might have been a broken dynamic in this relationship because the suspect of this murder was the lover of the victim. It needs to be talked about. Violence between a same-sex couple does occur more often than you would think. Sometimes because one assumes the role of the alpha and then overtakes their loved one. There are also other factors that could be at play, such as homophobia, which, in case you are not aware, does exist in some people who identify as queer. The reason for this, although it does not excuse the behavior, is because there is a deep-rooted shame that they feel, often from a long period of being closeted or fearing judgment from family members or close friends. It's not something you can just turn off like a switch. Homophobia indeed does, often anyway, stem from environmental factors, family dynamics, shame, and fear. After all, hatred in and of itself is rooted in fear.
The fact of the matter, whether abuse occurs in couples or not, oftentimes it can lead to murder, and you hear stories all the time where a scorned lover will snap and then kill. There's an entire show about this particular topic, actually. It's literally called Snapped. In this case, we aren't sure what led to this point, as unfortunately, Naasire's background isn't that well known, but it is our hope to amplify his voice so that more can be known about him. So with all this in mind, our first story is about what happened to Naasire Johnson.
Family and friends of a missing Philadelphia man are searching for answers tonight. They gathered earlier in Spring Garden hoping to spread the word about 20-year-old Naasire Johnson. The young man's grandmother tells Eyewitness News she reported him missing last week. Johnson's loved ones are begging for his safe return.
Naasire, all I want you to do is just come back home. Please just come back, please. Wherever you are, just come back. Just give me some relief, some comfort. I can't eat, I can't sleep. Please, just please come home, please.
Johnson's grandmother says police took her grandson's toothbrush and comb in efforts to collect DNA. Philadelphia police were not able...
During the early morning hours of February 18th of 2022, Kylan Pratt allegedly shot Naasire Johnson in the neck inside Pratt's residence in North Philadelphia to keep their intimate relationship hidden. Then Pratt transported Naasire's body to Glendinning Rock Garden in Fairmount Park, where he allegedly set it on fire on 2 consecutive evenings.
Cynthia Johnson said her grandson Naasire, who was openly gay, left in an Uber on the evening of February 17th and never returned. She reported him missing the following day. She said police told her Naasire's phone was last pinged at 12:20 a.m. on February 18th in the vicinity of Pratt's home. Naasire's friend told Cynthia that he was in a relationship with a man who used the nickname 29th Street Rich, and she later learned that that was Kylan Pratt's nickname.
Cynthia told the Philadelphia Inquirer that she had raised Naasire since he was a year old, and that the two still lived together and shared their meals together ever since. Her grandson's murder has left her devastated. She said, quote, "I'm in the process of trying to move because it was just him and me here, together," end quote. She told the Inquirer, "Every time I wake up and see his picture, I start crying. I can't eat, I can't sleep." Cynthia believed her grandson was the victim of a hate crime and that his killer should go to prison for life. Cynthia also said, quote, "The way he took him out there and burned him, that's just a hate crime. He knew what he was going to do to him," end quote.
His godmother, Rashonda Powers, stated that, quote, "He started at community college in business administration, but his ultimate goal was to become a psychologist to help people. That was just his nature, to help people." So he was a 2018 graduate of the Charter High School for Architecture and Design and was working as a home health care aide to prepare to enroll into the Community College of Philadelphia at the time of his death.
Someone walking their dog on February 20th, 2022 at 12:11 p.m. spotted a foot, and that is when the police were called to the cobblestone trail at Brewery Hill and Kelly Drive. Police officers responded to the scene to find a body wrapped in bed sheets and charred. It was impossible for authorities to determine whether the body was male or female until the DNA could be extracted from the spleen, since the body was so badly burned. Detective Anderson said that the fact that Naasire wore braces on his teeth helped with the identification. Also, a tipster provided important information. On Monday, February 21st, the medical examiner ruled the manner of death a homicide. Naasire was only 20 years old.
Through an investigation and those tips, police were able to develop a suspect, which was Kylan Pratt. And on June 15th of 2022, the facts of the case were presented to the district attorney's office for charging. The DAO approved charges against Kylan Pratt for murder, possessing an instrument of a crime, abuse of a corpse, and tampering with evidence. On March 23rd, 2022, police had arrested Pratt at his residence on the basis of an outstanding warrant for allegedly assaulting the mother of his daughter. The warrant was approved on September 30th of 2021, so why wasn't he already in jail? Why did it take over 6 months to arrest him? I mean, it remains unclear why the arrest warrant wasn't effectuated by police until after Johnson was killed. Quote, "The police attempted to serve the warrant on at least 3 separate occasions." Corporal Jasmine Riley told PGN. They were unsuccessful in apprehending the defendant, which was Pratt at those times, end quote. After the arrest, Cynthia said, quote, "It's a relief that they arrested someone, but at the same time, I'm just so hurt. It's just so sad. He didn't have to do that to him. My grandson didn't deserve that, end quote.
Detective Anderson said several items found in Pratt's residence were incriminating. Those items included bleach, carpeting stained with Naashire's blood, and evidence that Pratt did a Google search regarding how to have sex with a dead body. Disgusting. Anderson also read incriminating text found on Pratt's cell phone indicating he was planning to hide from authorities prior to being arrested. Quote, "A lot of cell phone information was deleted," end quote. Anderson testified during the trial.
Now, during cross-examination, defense attorney Gary Server questioned whether Pratt's residence was a rooming house. In this questioning, Server raised the possibility that someone other than Pratt killed Naasire. However, Anderson noted that Pratt's residence only had one bed and that none of the 4 bedrooms had a lock on its door, further indicating it's not a rooming house. And in case someone didn't know what a rooming house is, which is what the defense attorney mentions, it's a fancy word for either a group home or having a roommate. Pretty much if you have separate bedrooms but share the kitchen, bathroom, living room, etc. It's a roommate situation, really.
Pratt attended the preliminary hearing wearing a white t-shirt and slacks, his arms heavily tattooed. He didn't make a public statement, but was said to carefully review exhibits as they were handed to him. According to court records, Pratt pleaded not guilty to the charges and told police he didn't even know Naasire.
Homicide detective Robert Daly performed an extensive study of records relating to the cell phones of Naasire and Pratt. He created these elaborate diagrams of pings emanating from the cell phones, which he displayed on a screen in the courtroom. Daly said that the pings show Naasire traveled from the West Philadelphia residence to Pratt's North Philadelphia residence during the early morning hours of February 18th, and then Naashire's body ended up at Glendinning Rock Garden, which is less than a mile from Pratt's home.
After the hearing, Cynthia Johnson said she just wants justice for her grandson. She said Pratt should spend the rest of his life behind bars. Kelly Burkhart, a LGBTQ+ liaison for the Philadelphia District Attorney's Office, said, quote, "It's shameful that the defendant would try to cover up something, and now the whole world knows. It's incredibly heinous and disgusting someone would hurt another human being by doing something like this. We, the DA's office, are going to do our due diligence to make sure there is justice for Naasire and his family." End quote.
After an hour-long preliminary hearing on July 11th, Pratt was held for trial on charges of first-degree murder and related offenses. Municipal Judge Wendy L. Pugh didn't downgrade or dismiss any of the charges against Pratt, which include murder, abuse of a corpse, tampering with evidence, and possessing a prohibited firearm.
Initially, the Philadelphia police had reported the homicide as an anti-gay hate crime to the Pennsylvania State Police, which compiles such statistics and shares them with the FBI for inclusion in the FBI's annual hate crimes report. However, for reasons that remain unclear, the hate crimes report was withdrawn. Homicide Captain Jason Smith indicated that he wasn't aware of the initial hate crimes report for Johnson's homicide, but Smith said he doesn't believe Johnson's homicide is a hate crime.
Smith had said in an interview, quote, "I am sensitive to this stuff. If I thought this was a hate crime in any way, shape, or form, I would absolutely report it as such. We need something more concrete." At some point, the FBI became involved in the Johnson matter. On August 12th, a state police spokesperson wrote to PGN, quote, "In some cases, like the Johnson case, we defer to the FBI's judgment. In this case, the FBI made the determination that the incident was reported correctly without any bias." End quote.
But an FBI spokesperson wrote to PGN on August 12th, quote, "While FBI guidance is sometimes provided to a state uniform crime reporting program or directly contributing to law enforcement agency, it is ultimately the responsibility of the investigating agency to determine whether a criminal incident was motivated by bias and to report a bias-motivated incident to their state UCR program and/or the FBI." End quote.
On another hand, Justin Robinette, an attorney and local civil rights advocate, said that the Johnson homicide is a hate crime in his opinion. In an email, he had said, quote, "It doesn't surprise me that this homicide isn't being considered a hate crime given the history of anti-LGBT police bias and brutality exhibited towards this community. In the case of Naasire Johnson, just because the defendant had a relationship with the victim doesn't exclude the possibility that the homicide could have been motivated, at least in part, by the defendant's hatred of gay people. Gay and bi men can hate other gay people, and they can hate themselves. Those who say they love trans people also use violence towards their partners when they worry the relationship is going to be revealed. If hate was a motivating factor in that homicide, then it should be reported as a hate crime. Not doing so obscures what happened, and, as a result, the violence people commit towards members of this community is allowed to continue." End quote.
Pratt is being held at the Philadelphia Industrial Correctional Center in Northeast Philadelphia. He is not eligible for bail. A formal arraignment was scheduled for August 1st, but I couldn't find any information of it that it took place and or what the outcome was. All I know for sure is that he is still in prison.
Naasire's grandmother, Cynthia, now says that she's considering moving because she's all alone now, and the house where she lived with Naasire stirs up a lot of painful memories. Quote, "Every time I wake up and see his picture, I start crying. I can't eat. I can't sleep. Why did he have to do that? He didn't have to do that to him." End quote.
Not long after what happened to Naasire, another incident of violence occurred. This one is especially unclear because what happened to Eric Pope was the first deemed hate crime and then quietly taken off the table. There seems to be a little bit more known about Eric Pope, but nonetheless, still not enough. With that, let's dive in.
On Saturday, April 16th of 2022 at 12:50 a.m., Eric Pope had just been escorted outside of the Taboo Lounge and Sports Bar located in Philadelphia for being intoxicated when Kenneth Fry, a bouncer, punched Eric in the face. Sadly, a week later, on April 23rd, Eric was pronounced dead at the hospital.
On the Taboo Lounge and Sports Bar website, an event calendar shows that on the night of April 16th, 2 shows were scheduled to take place. One titled Transcend, scheduled from 10 p.m. to 12 a.m. with a promo graphic describing the event as a trans and non-binary artist showcase, and another titled Primetime, scheduled from 12 a.m. to 12:30 a.m., promoted as a drag showcase.
Eric seemed like a really awesome person. He was even known for being the youngest person ever to serve on the New Bedford School Committee at the time he was elected in 2001 at the age of 21. He served on the community until 2010. Eric also worked for the Obama administration, and at the time of his death, Eric was an employee of the Monetary Affairs Division with the Federal Reserve Board and was remembered by friends as someone who always smiled, had a positive attitude, and was generous.
New Bedford Mayor John Mitchell wrote on Facebook, quote, "I was shocked and saddened to learn this week of the tragic death of former New Bedford School Committee member Eric Pope. Eric was the first elected to the committee in 2001 and was at the time the youngest person ever so elected. He served until 2010 and distinguished himself as a champion of our city's school children." He goes on to say, quote, "We are grateful for his public service and commitment to the city. I offer my condolences to his family at this difficult time and hope that the justice will be done in his name." End quote.
Tony Cabral, a member of the Massachusetts House of Representatives, added, quote, "I'm saddened to share the tragic passing of my friend Eric Pope. Eric was a generous and caring friend and dedicated public servant for New Bedford. This is an immense loss for our community, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to know and work with Eric for so many years. He and his family are in my thoughts and prayers, and I hope that those responsible for his death are brought to swift justice." End quote.
CCTV footage shows Eric Pope, who was 41 at the time, dancing on the pavement outside after being escorted out before he is approached by the bouncer, Kenneth Fry. Prior to him being identified by the police as Fry, The Philadelphia Inquirer reported that the bouncer who punched Eric Pope worked for a private security company, Mainline Private Security, and was not an employee of the Taboo Lounge and Sports Bar. After Fry punched Eric, Eric fell back, hitting his head on the sidewalk. When the EMTs arrived, they said that Eric was unresponsive and did not regain consciousness.
Kenneth Fry, 24, of Philadelphia, arrived at the Philadelphia Public Services Building with his attorney to turn himself in on April 27th at about 2:20 p.m. Fry was charged with third-degree murder, but he does maintain his innocence. This charge could carry a sentence of up to 20 years in prison if convicted. He is next scheduled to appear in court on May 16th. The charge of murder in the third degree encompasses, quote, all other kinds of murder, end quote. And that doesn't fall under definitions of murder in the first or second degrees. Third degree murder is actually a charge that exists only in the states of Pennsylvania, Florida, and Minnesota.
Advocates say Pope posed no threat to Fry and was targeted due to his LGBTQ status. Initially, Philadelphia police reported Pope's homicide to the state police as an anti-gay hate crime. But for reasons that remain unclear, the hate crimes report was withdrawn.
Smith said investigators haven't presented him with information that Pope's sexual orientation was a motive in the crime. Quote, they were involved in an argument, he said. There were choice words going back and forth. I don't think it had anything to do with the person's sexual orientation. I received no information from my investigators that leads me to believe either case was a hate crime or bias incident. The information that we have at the time is not going to be enough to deem these as being hate crimes or bias incidents, end quote. Smith said investigators who provide hate crimes information to him are sensitive to LGBT issues, but the captain acknowledged that he's not aware of any openly LGBT investigators who provide such information to him.
Taboo staff offered sympathies to the family and friends of Eric. They said the bar will continue to strive to do better for the community. Quote, as we move forward in the most respectful manner possible for Eric's family and his memory, we will continue to engage the community in efforts to focus on anti-violence, end quote. Taboo also hired additional employees who the bar said are, quote, trained and certified in accordance with all city requirements, end quote. All Taboo employees, including management, will undergo further de-escalation and LGBTQIA+ awareness and sensitivity training, according to a statement.
Both of these murders occurred within less than 2 months of each other this year alone. We love to think that we're progressing and being inclusive and kind to those who may have a different way of life than others, but unfortunately, we see these crimes still happening today. It's time for a change. We call for change, and we all need to be allies.
To be an ally is to not only be kind and advocate for those who are deemed extra vulnerable, but also watch their back for them. This means watching your friends' drinks if they look away, keeping awareness of individuals who are acting shady, being extra sensitive in the public situations where your friend could be targeted due to factors that should not matter. Literally being their guardian angel. An extra set of eyes never hurts. And sometimes, even if the situation is a safe one, you don't realize the impact you have on someone you are protecting.
People can act strong and invincible all they want, but the best thing you can do is protect them at all costs because they are bees. And as always, bees are resilient and strong, but at the same time, they are vulnerable. We need bees to help us survive and thrive in life. Without bees, we as a human race are doomed. So remember, it's really not always sunny in Philadelphia. So be the sunshine and be vigilant. For when you mess with the bees,
you get the hive.
Thank you for listening to A Nefarious Nightmare. Original intro music by Ghost Stories Incorporated. Remixed by Ryan RCX Murphy. Additional music provided by Epidemic Sound. This podcast was researched, scripted, and produced by Amanda Cronin and Courtney Finner. A Nefarious Nightmare is a Cloud 10 iHeart podcast. Managed by A Nefarious Nightmare, Sim Sarna, and Jamie Rice of Murderish and Dirty Money Moves. Thank you again for listening, and be vigilant.